What up, YouTube?
Hello,
It's Gabe
and this is Matthew.
from the Spinecrackers podcast. You're listening to another episode of our beloved series, what do you call it? The Machen Minisodes. Well, we were
Machenverse.
We were batting around like 10 different names, and then we just went with this one.
The Machen Minisodes.
The Machen Minisodes.
Murakami just set the alliteration stage, and we've been sort of just
sucking off the teat of alliteration.
Yeah. I mean, it works. It's a literary podcast.
What are we gonna do? Yeah, true. What are we gonna do when we do these about an author's last name doesn't start with N or M?
Well, I don't even want to think about the horrific. Like, that's a very scary and unknown future to me, where I have to think of a new alliterative pun.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't like it.
That's too much mental energy. That's emotional labor.
Yeah. To make me think about the future in any way.
Yeah. No cap. That's actually true. Well, so as implied by the title, these are discussions that Matt and I have about the shorter fiction of Welsh weird fiction progenitor, arguably, Arthur Machen.
Yes,
who writes weird, spooky stories.
Yeah, he's mocking scary stories. I don't know if we made that joke before.
Oh no, we didn't. Like making. That's
yeah.
I get it. Okay, nice.
Yeah, you get the low-hanging fruit first, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
You know.
Yeah. So today we're talking about three stories. One of them slightly longer, and then two very short ones. We're talking about the Red Hand, the Monstrance, right?
Yes.
And then the Bowmen.
The Bowman.
The Bowman. So what do you think? Let's start with the two shorter ones.
Yeah, what I have to say about these two, and specifically the Bowman, are almost like less to do with the whole mythology of the Angels of Mons. Is to me the way more
for the people who don't know, what is that a reference to?
Well, I figure we'll get to it with the Bowman, right? Because that's kind of what got that ball rolling, and sort of it spun out into something that like Machen himself was a little bit uncomfortable with.
Yes. These are both stories of fictionalized accounts of events in World War One.
Is the Monstrance also in the same time period? Because the
Bowman
was written in 1914 or 15, and then I thought the Monstrance was. I thought they were like basically two sides of that conflict, just sort of like mirroring each other, which is kind of why I wanted to read both of them.
I think it makes sense that they go together. So I mean, these are basically two stories about, as I said, fictionalized accounts of events in World War One, and they're basically sort of like I would say, like, maybe this is going to sound controversial, but I feel like these are basically both pieces of wartime propaganda in a way.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
Machen
Monstrance was 1915, by the way. I just looked it up. So
okay, so 1914, then 1915. So yeah, I think they literally are. Because Machen was a war reporter as one of his many gigs, I guess, or I guess reportage was his
reportage,
how he paid the bills.
I always get reportage and rapport confused.
Reportage is what I mean, right?
Yeah, I think
reporting.
So. Yeah, just journalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But yeah, I think that was part of his kind of his day job, as it were, for a time at least.
So yeah, I think he was doing what a lot of British patriots were doing at the time, and essentially writing something to literally like rouse and inspire and make it seem as though God were on the side of the English in that conflict. And
because things were not looking great for a while, right? For England in World War One.
Yeah, I should have. I wanted to do. I should have done a little more research on the battle itself, more specifically.
They got worked. Yeah, they got worked, and it was a series. There were a series of battles that the British fought against the, I guess at the time, Prussian army, right?
Right.
And I think that like they were, it was a series of defeats. There was Mons, and then I forget what the other two are. Hold on, I have a little article about this, but let's
I
see.
knew I could count on you.
Yeah. So,
But Mons wasn't a turning point in some way, right?
I don't. I think so. I don't know like the details of it, but it was the Germans were just kind of, they had just steamrolled the French. The French got pretty owned at let's see, this is here too, Charleroi.
Okay.
And it was, there were a number of other defeats of the British army as well around the same time. And so it was, Machen wrote this story, I think, for a newspaper originally. And published in the Evening News on September 29th of that year. There was apparently, well, which ones should we talk about first? I guess we're already talking about the Bowmen. So
let's do the Bowmen. They're both 2 pages long. So
yeah, they're both really short. So basically there were sort of rumors going around, I guess, of some sort of divine intervention at the battle, which I don't really understand because the British lost pretty badly. So I don't really know what the divine intervention would have been.
That was why my question was,
help them. I don't get it.
Did they just sort of like, the fact that anyone survived at all, was that like impressive?
It could have been. Yeah, I think it was a pretty bad defeat. And so the story is about this British soldier who's in the trenches. He sees this, I think it was like 300,000, like in real, like that was the actual number of the German army at the time, which is crazy.
Yeah.
For that period of history. And they're being marched on, and they're getting shelled, and they're just overall getting worked pretty hard. And this guy sort of starts gallows humor, like singing old British war songs and stuff, and prayers, and
like meet me in Tipperary, and
exactly. And
my heart's in Piccadilly.
Yes, right, like that. Right. And so he sort of calls upon Saint George, who is the patron saint of England in general, I believe, right?
Defeater of the dragon.
Yes. Yeah.
And Chaos, Jordan Peterson.
That's right. And apparently his prayers are heard, because a number of essentially spectral archers show up and just start raining divine justice on the German army. Allowing the British to escape and killing a number of Germans in the process.
And which apparently only that one sort of like touched by grace kind of soldier could see, right? Because like the other British fighters were like, they're dying, I don't know why, because like the Germans and they're getting hit with spectral arrows, and then there's no wound, they're just sort of like collapsing inexplicably.
Yes. And this is a reference to another famous episode in British military history, which is the Battle of Agincourt, which was in 1415, where a bunch of archers essentially saved the British army against I think it was the French at that time.
Henry V.
And so this sort of idea of like heroic kind of divine intervention is very baked into the British sort of military psyche, it seems, and that is what Machen's sort of playing on here. And it's interesting. I mean, I think as you referenced earlier, that's basically the whole story. So arguably the more interesting thing about the story is the sort of public response to it and the events that came about after its publishing.
Because it was like Machen was a war reporter, and I think it was just like published alongside a bunch of other stuff with no disclaimer that it was like a fictional account,
right?
And like people found it so inspiring and so cool, and then like weird testimonials of other people also like confirming started to come in just alongside it.
People thought it was fucking real.
Yeah. It was like
And
a psyop
it was like, yeah,
but a good one, I guess.
right. And it
A
was
morale boosting one.
well, and it got to the point, I was reading a little bit that there were, because then Machen eventually came out and was like, y'all, this is fiction, like
Guys.
chill out, it's fiction, this didn't actually happen. And then after he clarified that it was fiction, he was accused of by conspiracy theorists of essentially doing a deep state cover up of what actually happened at the battle.
Right. They're like, we think this might actually be treason. Like
Yes.
they're like you can't just deny this thing that's like giving everyone a kind of some more wind in their sails during this conflict.
Right.
Because of the well, they mentioned the censorship as like some sort of act. Oh man, I need to pull it back up because like again we've praised the endnotes to a bunch in the others.
These are very thorough endnotes in this Oxford University Press Oxford World's Classics edition that we both have. Matt's has a different cover, and the endnotes are really excellent. So I forget who prepped these. Aaron Worth. So shout outs to Aaron Worth again.
Your work was worth a lot to me.
Okay, there you go.
Sorry, hold on. Yeah, the censorship, which was the Defense of the Realm Act of 1914 gave the British government power to, quote, prevent the spread of reports likely to cause disaffection or alarm.
Yes. So they were trying to invoke that against Machen when he tried to say that it was fiction.
I think they were like, you're imperiling the realm by like disillusioning people with the, no longer believing the fictional account you wrote earlier,
right?
Which is just like such a bizarre like turnaround of this whole situation.
Yeah, very strange. I mean, it's I wonder if, because he kind of was like peeved by the whole thing in terms of just like, guys, like everyone relax. This was
yeah, like, you guys are being stupid, and very
like,
credulous.
I'm telling you it was fiction. Obviously there were not fucking ghost archers at the battle. And
I just love that though. I love that like it got away from him.
Yeah. It's a really interesting little episode in literary history.
And it's still something that people reference and believe. Like there are flare-ups not too long ago of this kind of thing being mentioned before, specifically like the Angel of Mons. So Machen essentially created, I would say, a sort of folkloric entity of sorts.
Yeah, definitely. Which
by accident is probably how it happens often.
Yeah, exactly. Which is so fascinating because of course that's one of the main concerns with so much of his writing is these sort of apocryphal pseudo true legends and occult obscurities and fucking cryptids and shit. And it's very much in the spirit of Matt's background right now.
He did it. He made one.
Yeah, and he created one, which in this story, which is fascinating to me.
And it's, and he did it. I don't know. There's just so much interesting, like the power of the word here is interesting to me. Yes. Especially in the pseudo-religious context of the story, which again was like literally just some run-of-the-mill propaganda fantastical account. Like, damn, effective.
Yeah, and it's a testament to the power of his writing, which I think is, we'll talk about it maybe more when we talk about the Red Hand because it's a little bit more meaty, in terms of his writing. But he's a fantastic writer, just on a prose level, in my opinion. Maybe arguably some people might see some of it as like a little overwritten or whatever, but I don't feel that way personally. Should we talk about the Monstrance?
Yeah.
So this is basically another piece of war propaganda, essentially.
Yeah.
Sort of talking about, it's from the perspective of, well, it's not from the perspective, but it's dealing with a German soldier named Karl Heinz, who essentially, basically there was the Germans were trying to sneak around the British line while the British were occupied with the front and another side.
Flanking them.
They were flanking them, right? Little pincer maneuver. And he all of a sudden sort of stands up and like makes this I forget exactly what he says, but he stands up and sort of says, yeah, the glory of the Lord, and just kind of dies. And that, of course, gives away the Germans' position with their whole sneaky strategy. And then the British are able to kill them all. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
good job, lads.
Good job, lads. We did it. And so it's basically like a series of excerpts from his diary. That's not the whole thing, but that's a big part of it. And it's sort of him seeing these disturbing religious visions and, hearing voices and whatnot. And it ultimately sort of drives him crazy, gives away the position, and just bungles it.
Right. And he's seeing like processions of like, children, and then like
and he sees there's a saint involved, or some sort of saint
ghost priest,
Saint Lambert, the priest of Saint Lambert.
Okay.
Which I don't know what that is, like a little ghost priest. And he's seeing visions of like a child crucified on a church door. And I don't know if these are references to like actual historical events or anything like that. But so yeah, he's just sort of slowly losing his mind over the course of a month or so. And noting it in his diary, he's hearing church bells. And
yeah, it says here in the notes again, sick. No, I'm not often as excited to read the end notes as I was with this. So Saint Lambert, on that terrible day, widespread reports of what came to be known as the German atrocities, in quotes, both real and inflated and Allied propaganda, followed in the wake of the German invasion of Belgium, which is where Mons is, and France. Machen, inventing his own war atrocity, has out-Heroded Herod.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, so this is basically propaganda-wise, this is basically classic overinflation of war atrocities, fabrication of them, and then, of course, the divine retribution for how terrible the Germans are.
Yes, the Hun.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting little story. I feel like the device of the diary was interesting to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Machen definitely deploys that. That was the other thing that I think got people to kind of, in the way that like found footage horror movies kind of were like used to create a sense of believability. Yeah, Machen deploys the diary entry a lot, or just the documents of people sort of describing things, and official documents and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I think we mentioned it in the other the Great God Pan episode too. Like that's kind of why the epistolary was so useful in like Dracula and stuff as another horror device, to just be like, we just found some letters and they were deeply disturbing, and this could happen to you. That's
a really good connection, the found footage horror thing. I think this is definitely like in that spirit.
Yeah.
And of course, the journalistic sort of realism of like, look, we found this guy's actual diaries,
Yeah, I think it cemented the everyone kind of falling for it, right? Like it was like super effective. It's why Machen probably got the job.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, any other thoughts on either of these two before we move on here?
Not really. I just it's so funny what sticks and continues to now just exist in the popular imagination.
Yes.
It's great. It's a sort of irony and confirmation of things Machen believed and was trying to do. And,
right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just kind of like, whatever propaganda. It's just law propaganda.
As stories, they're kind of just they're curios, I think, more than anything else. Little historical curios. Because I didn't really realize personally that Machen like did this sort of writing. I mean, they're both different and similar to his other stories in the sense that they deal with weird sort of supernatural creepiness, but the purpose of just straight war propaganda, I think, is really, really interesting. And I didn't know much about that that he did that until I read these two for this.
Yeah, it tracks with his, I guess, general like character or whatever. He was a sort of conservative and very religious guy. So
yes,
this would be in peace with that.
Absolutely. For the motherland.
Yeah.
For
Right.
I just want to do the Trevelyan from GoldenEye voice. For
Do
England, for England, James. And then he dies and falls off the cradle. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
In the game.
In the game. In a video game.
In the video game that I love.
Yeah.
GoldenEye 007.
Right. And for anyone who, if we want to be topical for Elden Ring players,
always
the Bowmen
always for the Elden Ring players.
The Bowmen are sort of like the spirit ashes summons you get, including the huntsman. So there you go.
Yes, I don't know about Elden Ring, but I did just recently start the first Dark Souls because I never played it. So
listen, we got to get the gamers to read.
Yeah, we got to have the literate gaming community. Needs
please
to come together
so you can write better Final Fantasy stories.
think of it as professional development for your fan fictions.
Oh god. Yeah. What is the longest running piece of literature? The Super Smash Brothers fanfic?
Something like that. Yeah. And I think it's just the longest period, not just like the
written work ever.
Yeah. I believe that's true.
Yeah. So Bible can go fuck itself.
Get out of here. Fucking Mahabharata. No way.
Weak
sauce.
I want to hear about Lucario fucking Mr. whatever.
Mr. Mime is he even in?
Mr. Mime. No, what's the little ink guy?
I don't know.
That
Mr. Game and Watch.
Mr. Game and Watch.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
I wish I had that on my okay.
Yes.
They're in love.
They're in love. Hey, it's real. Love is love, dude. Love is love. Pokemon 2D Game and Watch love.
Yeah, Pokemon go to the library and pick up a nice Arthur Machen book.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. All right.
We're gonna take a brief pause, and we'll come back after the jump and talk about the Red Hand. And we're back after that.
A brief pause,
interlude,
which you'd know nothing about.
Right. On the video, it'll be 0 seconds. It'll just go from the end to this.
Seamless
transition. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So we're talking now about the Red Hand, which is a longer story. What, like 25 pages or something?
More substantial.
Yeah, 20 something pages. Yeah.
And the delightful return.
My favorite, dude.
Our boys Dyson and Phillips. My favorite dynamic duo. I'm memeing a little bit, but quickly becoming one of my favorite duos in literature. Totally.
Like, they're so cool.
I love them because obviously, like, they are Watson, right, and Holmes, essentially, right?
But it's just a classic same but different situation,
right? Well, I was just saying, like, I think those authors knew each other.
Machen and
Doyle, right?
Doyle.
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
I believe so.
That's
or at least we're familiar.
That's what's up.
Because Machen was rubbing shoulders with some interesting people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Being in the Theosophical Society and all that.
Which we've talked about on previous episodes of this series.
Yes, which, at that time was its heyday, probably. And was also essentially just like a cool club that you could be in with like other weird leisured artists and rich people.
It would be so epic to be like, it's basically, I feel like being in the Theosophical Society would be like a flex on Masons. Like people who are like in the Masons, like, oh, you're a Mason. Well, I'm a Theosophist.
Yeah, you're a Mason. Well, are you guys trying to achieve superpowers? Or are you just bricklaying, bitch?
Of course, the Mason would just be like, I'm not telling, but yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, all these fraternities and weird, brotherhoods and
skull and bones shit.
Skullduggery is happening.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, as Matt says, we have the return of Dyson and Phillips. We are firmly back in the Machenverse, as I call it.
They will appear again too.
I think
further stories with them.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have enough material for like 2 more episodes of this. There's a couple more long stories and a number of really short ones in this collection. There's a lot in here. So Phillips, if you're not familiar, Dyson and Phillips are these two, kind of leisurely gentlemen in London. and Phillips is a sort of hard-nosed science bro type guy.
Yes.
I forget what he actually does for like money.
He does
I assume they both just have family
ethnography.
money. Yeah. I think he's like an anthropologist, right?
Right.
Not
The old the
not
discarded term of ethnography is what they use here. But yeah, essentially an anthropologist, I believe.
Is it ethnography? Because ethnography is like a type of like it's a type of study. Maybe that is what they call it. I forget what the term that they use it, but it's something like that. Ethology, is that what it is?
No.
Whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, you might be right, but something along those lines.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. He's sort of a cultural researcher. And then Dyson is the classic just starving artist writer.
Right. But he's not starving either.
No,
like,
he's not starving.
That was what was so funny about their sort of introduction for us in, I think, the Three Imposters, where, right?
I think they're in the
In Most Light.
Oh, you might be right, because they're not in Great God Pan or the White People, right?
No.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Maybe it was the Three Imposters. They're in some of the shorter stories. I think they might be in the Lost Club.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
maybe
they're in some of the shorter stories. I forget.
I liked their
Phillips is in the Lost Club.
Okay.
Dyson is not. I don't think.
Another one of his eventful constitutionals through the streets of London.
Yes.
I love their characterization too, because they are literally described, I think, in the Three Imposters as like essentially, yes, men of leisure. Like they both came into money for different reasons,
right.
And they met at like a tobacconist's because they were like smoking loud and had way too much free time on their hands. And like,
sounds fucking nice, honestly.
They just started talking and like struck up a friendship, and so they're sort of like the fail sons of
yes, they have like, big fail son energy.
Their families were just like landed gentry that they inherited the like profits from after they were sold off,
and now they just fucking spend their days hunting down supernatural phenomena.
They literally just go on a walk, and then crazy shit happens every time.
Every fucking time, dude. Every time, including in this story. So
yeah.
So this, do you want to run through the plot, or I can do it.
We can tag team it.
Yeah,
because I kind of forget.
So basically, this is as Matt already referenced, another one of the classic and this is a theme in Machen that I think it comes through really, really in a distilled way in this story, because he's very concerned. He's very interested in the urban, like the nature of the city.
I think specifically like he's doing a sort of proto version of like psychogeography.
Yes,
which is something that like Ian Sinclair and like even Alan Moore were, and British authors in the 20th century and 21st century are also interested in. But yeah,
it's a very hot philosophical topic right now, like the idea of the philosophical relevance of space. And sure, obviously this is something that people have talked about in like architectural theory for a long time, but there's the David Harvey book Spaces of Capital, and
the Poetics of Space.
Yeah, there's the who is it, like Lefebvre, Henri Lefebvre,
somewhat French,
published a lot of just a little bit of a French influence there in the name. Published a lot of work on sort of philosophical theories of space, and I think Machen is really engaged in that work in a lot of these stories, and I think in this one it comes through in a really, really distilled way, and he's specifically interested in sort of the nature of chance and sort of like chance encounters in the city, and the way that the city sort of what's the term I'm looking for, can invite or structure these chance meetings, and in this story Dyson elaborates on his theory of improbability, right? Which we can talk about more, but the long and short of it is Dyson and Phillips are arguing about whether or not there are essentially like unknown, I don't know how to put it, like troglodyte relics of ancient like peoples that still exist and walk among us unknown, right? And Phillips is like, well, maybe, but probably not. And Dyson's like, oh, I bet there are. And like he's like, let's go find one. right now.
Dyson is very clearly, I would argue, like the authorial insert here. Like he's the one who is clearly more agreed with in the narratives and obviously by the author.
Yes.
As like having the appropriate approach to life and to these kind of things. But he needs it's more like, I think I mentioned before, it's way more like X-Files.
It's super X-Files.
You know, so you got spooky Dyson and just hard nosed, no matter how many aliens and werewolves he sees, you know, Phillips is still,
he just like, never believes it.
There's a material explanation for what's going on.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that Phillips's character is and Machen's view of this kind of that kind of worldview is summed up pretty well in this story on page 209, because Dyson's talking to him and he says, "My dear Phillips, you are a living example of the truth of the axiom that extreme skepticism is mere credulity."
yeah. I mean, this is like Phillips is who it feels like basically Machen is addressing and trying to kind of erode those kind of notions.
Yeah, like
in all of his work.
Exactly. Like the idea that the world sort of overflows the scientific strictures that people like Phillips want to box it into, right?
That it's dangerous that people are doing this because it blinds those to the true evil forces. Yeah, the other thing on page 213, right at the bottom, "I confess, Dyson," said Phillips, "that I feel both impatient and uneasy. You know my standpoint. Hard, matter-of-fact materialism, if you like, in its crudest form."
Yes.
Yeah. So he's not really like subtle about where he stands at all points.
Exactly.
But they're bros, and there's profitable discourse as we're trying to
super dudes rock.
Get that phrase out there, profitably discoursing, and that's why they are buds.
Very, very profitable discourse.
Because as we know from Blake,
what?
Opposition is true friendship.
Yes, indeed. That's why Matt and I are friends.
Yeah, that's right.
So they go out on this little walk and they stumble upon a murder, and it's a relatively famous doctor who has attended to the royal family on occasions. Thomas Vivian, right?
Yeah,
is his name.
Good rich doctor name.
Great name, fantastic name. And so he's been stabbed in the neck and is dead in a pretty unsavory part of London, from the way Machen writes it. It's a bit out of the way, a bit kind of dicey. Poor. Yep, exactly. That's just all it means. And there's a strange mark on the wall above his dead body. And so from what I can understand, I did do a little bit of research into it. It's basically this, right? Yeah. It's a fist with the thumb.
Got your nose.
Out, which I think, got your nose, which I believe is still a gesture of offense in some cultures, even
it's
today.
A fuck you.
Right? It's basically like a fuck you.
Yeah.
And it's pointed downward at the dead body, kind of like this, right?
Yes. I forgot we're doing visuals. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I forgot it's a video.
This is for YouTube, baby. So stop picking your nose.
Shit.
But so and then it's this story is essentially them trying to decipher what happened, why he died. There's a few things discovered on his body. There's a cryptic note and a few other weird details. He has a knife on him also that was not used, and he was stabbed, importantly, with like an old piece of flint, basically, like sort of like an arrowhead almost, it seems like. And that was what Dyson and Phillips were sort of talking about at the beginning of the story, which is like, are there the type of person that would have made something like this? Do they still walk among us, right?
Right. And I forget what was the impetus to even go on a walk through there.
Because Dyson was attempting to locate modern day troglodytes, and he thought that would be a good place to look, which of course, there's a lot of racial and class implications in that sort of discussion. I think this book actually, or this story, has a lot of little interesting details about class, really. Both in the way Machen describes the city, but also in some of the plot developments. And so essentially they undertake to solve the murder. there is I forget how they originally, and so it's mainly Dyson. Phillips is a little bit like, Dyson's kind of the main guy in this particular story. Phillips is a little bit removed. He's kind of, there for research support, basically.
Yeah.
And so Dyson starts going around to all of these like seedy bars, all of these weird kind of out of the way places in these, poorer areas of London to, see if he can't see the mark again, the red hand. It's written in chalk. And he is in a bar one night, and a drunk woman comes in, has a fight with the bartender, and then throws this object.
Yeah.
Right. And breaks a bottle, and Dyson buys it off the bartender, and it's this weird little kind of like tablet thing.
Yeah.
Right. With this like ornate design on it, depicting the hand, I believe, is on it. Right.
There's a hand, and then beneath it, there's
And
like
then
a bunch of spirals,
like celestial-esque spiral designs.
Yeah, spiral galaxy kind of like, yeah.
And he tries to decipher it. He tries to have Phillips look at it. No one can make heads or tails of it, really. And then Dyson gets the brilliant idea to essentially hire the sidewalk chalk artist outside his house to,
which the term for that is screever, which I like.
Screever, great word. Great word.
Yeah.
To just draw the design on the sidewalk every day in the hopes that and then Dyson is up in his apartment looking down, watching, noting the reactions of the passersby to this weird design.
Yes.
And ultimately he does find the dude who he sees the design, and he's goes crazy and like starts exhibiting,
runs away from it,
basically runs away. Dyson follows him, and it turns out that Vivian and this guy were basically like roommates back in the day when Vivian was poor, and this guy had gotten it into his head. He's from sort of out in the countryside of England, and he had gotten it into his head that there was some buried treasure from a previous civilization.
Was it implied that he was near Stonehenge?
I didn't catch that, but it's totally possible.
I just felt like there was some connection between, and I remember there was a reference to the sort of area in England where the henge, as they say in the notes, is. And I don't know if it ties into the fact that like the tablet is inscribed with what appears to be sort of like a celestial language or something, like a language that is partially derived from star charts, and which is,
yes,
I think Stonehenge was like a timekeeping thing, right? Like that's the sort of consensus around that. But
I believe so,
or to chart the seasons, but
something like that. Yeah. And there is reference. So the other guy's name, the guy that Dyson finds, is Mr. Selby.
Yeah.
And there is reference to Selby and Vivian having a sort of private language that they've made up just for each other that only they can understand, with references and sort of symbology. And that's what the note that Vivian had on him was written in. And so basically it comes out, Dyson finds Selby, and he brings him over to Phillips's house, and he's like, dude, all right, just lay it out. Tell us what happened.
Spill the beans. We own you. Spill
the tea, or else you're going to the cops. And basically he tells them that him and Vivian had sort of been searching for this treasure together, trying to find a map to it. Selby thinks he may have found the map. Vivian then, of course, gets into medical school, becomes a famous doctor, and they kind of grow apart, even though they had made a pact that if Selby ever was able to locate the treasure, they would split the money. Selby reaches out to Vivian after finding what he believes to be the location of the treasure, and he's like, let's go check this shit out together. Vivian, and then they meet up in the dark, scary alley in the bad neighborhood. Selby tells Vivian all about where he thinks the treasure is, and then Vivian attempts to kill Selby. He pulls a knife on him, and so Selby kills him in self-defense. And that's basically it. That's basically what happened. They basically solved the murder. Now there's a creepy little detail at the end when they ask him, so did you actually go back and find the treasure, and go to the treasure? And he pulls out this gold. It's not described, but it's apparently very horrific and offensive and gross. He's like,
it's called the pain of the goat.
The pain of the goat, which use your imagination on that one.
Yeah, I have an idea of what it is, but yeah.
Okay, I have an idea too, but maybe we can talk about that.
Maybe it's the same.
It could be.
Yeah.
And he says, this was the only thing I was able to get because the keepers of the treasure were still there. Dun dun dun. And that's basically the end of the story.
Yeah. Once again, there's some things that I've noticed in that were sort of at play in other Machen stories. I think what's so fun about the Dyson Phillips adventures is they always technically like figure some element of the thing out.
Yes.
But it's always gesturing at a huge occult conspiracy swirling around them.
Yes.
Because I was thinking of the three imposters and I was wondering, like, does this still work in, like, was Vivian, for instance, a member of the Lost Club? Or one of these things which, what's his, Dr. Lipsius? The sort of
Lipsius, yeah.
The
mastermind of the three imposters.
Yeah, who's running this
society thing.
The secret society for the evil application of all of these ancient secrets. Because yeah, you just don't get much. It's like they figure out who the murderer is, and that's technically a murder mystery solved. But it's deeply like almost disappointing, and you're left, I think, very intentionally with like more questions than answers.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because I was thinking that myself reading the story. Like, out of all of the Machen stories that we've read so far, this one is in some ways the most straightforward in terms of the sort of like solution, as it were. Like it's just a dude who killed an old friend in self-defense when the guy tried to kill him for money.
Right.
That's
right.
the basic, kind of outcome of their investigation. And yet, as you say, when you have the wider picture of Machen's kind of orientation and all of the different characters that are floating around in the Machenverse, hashtag Machenverse,
it's a thing.
It 100% is a thing.
Yeah.
But it really lends a different kind of air to the reading of like a story like this specifically, which like if you just read this on your own, you'd be like, on its own. So like say this was someone's first encounter with Machen, you would be like, okay, whatever. That's kind of a weird little crime mystery story. But when you put it into the context of what we know about Dyson and Phillips, what we know about the wider Machenverse, it as you say, it raises a lot of sort of different questions. Who was Vivian? Who else was he involved in? Are the keepers of this treasure that Selby finds somehow related to the, like the like nymphs that we saw in earlier stories, and
the fair folk,
yeah, Great God Pan, and some of those other stories. It fits into a much larger universe.
Yeah, I wonder how people. I'll do this research later, but I was just wondering how people encountered these as like a serial. I'm assuming, right?
Yeah,
or some way where he's. Machen is because this one is I feel very much about, like you said, Dyson, and kind of Dyson's process, which it does feel a little bit like how to in a way, right? Like, here's what I believe to be the appropriate way in which to orient yourself to receive these kind of cryptic and maybe occluded and occulted little bits of information and insights.
I think that's totally right, and I think that really resonates with your point earlier that Dyson is sort of like Machen's insert, or the character that he would agree with more in sort of his worldview. And I think this story is really a distillation of that sort of approach, which is very, and I think that's why Machen spends so much time in this story teasing out Dyson's like theory of improbability in the context of the city, right? So there's a line and then a longer paragraph that I want to read about this.
Sure.
So the first line where this is mentioned is on 206, where he says, he's talking about Dyson here. For a long time, he was unsuccessful and trembled at the thought that the black heaven, which is cryptic phrase that's referenced in the note that Vivian has on his dead body, that the black heaven might be hid in the coy retirements of Peckham or lurk perchance in the distant Willesden. But finally, improbability, in which he put his trust, came to the rescue. And so this is, referencing the artists that he finds, who draws this stuff on the sidewalk. But then Phillips and Dyson are talking later, and Dyson elaborates on his views of improbability, right? And the faith he puts in improbability as a concept. So this is on 212. Do you know, Phillips, said Dyson as he strolled at ease up and down the room, I will tell you how I work. I go upon the theory of improbability. The theory is unknown to you? I will explain. Suppose I stand on the steps of St. Paul's and look out for a blind man, lame of the left leg, to pass me. It is evidently highly improbable that I shall see such a person by waiting for an hour. If I wait 2 hours, the improbability is diminished, but is still enormous, and a watch of a whole day would give little expectation of success. But suppose I take up the same position day after day and week after week, don't you perceive that the improbability is lessening constantly, growing smaller day after day? Don't you see that two lines which are not parallel are gradually approaching one another, drawing nearer and nearer to a point of meeting, till at last they do meet, and improbability has vanished altogether? That is how I found the black tablet. I acted on the theory of improbability. It is the only scientific principle that I know of which can enable one to pick out an unknown man from amongst 5 million. And I just think that is Machen's thesis statement for his work, his approach, his sort of worldview. It's about making the improbable probable, or letting the improbable become probable through sort of openness and chance.
Right. Which is, isn't that probability still?
Yeah, right. it's just probability.
Owned by facts and logic. Machen.
Get worked.
But no, the point that I think actually does hold legitimately now is like, don't shut off to things that seem improbable.
Yes,
right? Like,
right.
What they say, like, revelation comes to prepared souls, or whatever. Like, I feel like that's kind of the vibe there. Like,
yes,
attune yourself and prime yourself to these things you would otherwise write off because you won't see them if you don't want to.
Right, exactly. And I think that's Machen in a nutshell to me in terms of his worldview.
And it's interesting because, I also brought up Holmes and stuff because this feels a little bit like a critique of the classic Holmesian version of
logical deduction.
Yeah, right. Like, Dyson makes some deductions, but it's way more about this kind of holistic intuitiveness that puts him in the path of these things, as he says. It's kind of more like I think like Edgar Allan Poe's conception of how somebody would, figure out what is ultimately like a puzzle, like something real that is there that you can perceive at some point. It's just like the approach that's not going to be done through pure scientific method, logical deduction.
Right. Yep. I think that's exactly the point Machen is getting at here.
And there's even points for being literate too, because there's the De Quincey quote from what is it, Diary of an Opium Eater?
Yeah, something like that.
Confessions of an Opium Eater. Referencing the street that Twimbly, what the fuck's his name again?
Selby.
Yeah, that Selby it frequents or lives on.
Gray's Inn Road.
Yeah, Gray's Inn Road, the stony-hearted mother or whatever.
Yes.
That drank the tears of children and all that kind of stuff. So there's even like this kind of like little bit of like and read too.
Also read.
Like, be literate in things that are not just like professional trade journals, because that's another thing in the arsenal to perceive.
Right. And read widely, right? Because that's sort of I feel like it's a little bit of a critique, the way he characterizes Phillips, of academic parochialism, right? Just this sort of like siloed off approach to just, I'm going to focus on a super narrow question like, you know, the nature of this arrowhead or whatever that Phillips is obsessed with at the beginning of the story, rather than letting these disparate elements kind of swirl and via the theory of improbability, as
Right.
as Dyson calls it, kind of coalesce in a way that holistically makes sense.
Yeah, that appeals to me.
Yeah,
personally.
I think it's an appealing view.
Because they also clown on Phillips with the what does he say? Like, they have this tablet, and Phillips is like, I have like Dyson can't figure it out, and he's getting kind of frustrated. And then Phillips is like, I have 37 steps for decrypting any linguistic,
yes,
know. And then later he comes back, he's like, I didn't do it.
Couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's hard.
That was such a meme. That was such a meme. Machen was definitely memeing.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, I mean, what, you know, it's a can of worms in terms of, right, as an academic, I feel you know, obligated to defend the parochialism to some degree, but I think that, you know, in terms of the ideas that have sort of affected my life the most, it's through that sort of holistic, and oftentimes it's very long term, right? Like, this is what Dyson's talking about when he's like, yeah, it's not going to happen in a week or 2 weeks or whatever, but
Right.
over the long term, things coalesce and make sense. And that has been true for me in my life, in terms of the books that I've read and connections that I've been able to make intellectually and philosophically over the long term.
Yeah, lines converge. It just takes a minute.
Yes, exactly. I also just loved some of there's a passage or two that I just want to read, that just to highlight Machen's writing a little bit, because I think it's easy to kind of you know, underappreciate. I think there's a lot of interesting descriptions of, again, like just the city, the places they go in the city, what the vibe is. Like, some of the descriptions of the bars that Dyson finds himself in, I thought were just really just evocative and powerful.
Yeah.
But this passage, I just wanted to highlight, because it was just good, just damn good writing to me. So this is Dyson sort of analyzing the tablet initially. Is it some natural marking, thought Dyson? There have been queer designs, likenesses of beasts and flowers in stones with which man's hand had nothing to do. And he bent over the stone with a magnifier, only to be convinced that no hazard of nature could have delineated these varied labyrinths of line. The whorls were of different sizes. Some were less than the 12th of an inch in diameter, and the largest was a little smaller than a sixpence. And under the glass, the regularity and accuracy of the cutting were evident, and in the smaller spirals, the lines were graduated at intervals of a hundredth of an inch. The whole thing had a marvelous and fantastic look, and gazing at the mystic whorls beneath the hand, Dyson became subdued with an impression of vast and far-off ages, of a living being that had touched the stone with enigmas before the hills were formed, when the hard rocks still boiled with fervent heat.
Ooh.
I was just like, that is just so evocative, and again speaks to that sense in Machen of conversations being had across ages, right?
Yes.
Of convergences in history happening across these vast spans of time. And I just thought it was such a goosebump causing passage.
And I think just like it is just a genuinely useful notion to have, you know, especially when, you know, it's important to have historical knowledge, because like psychogeography feels to me a lot like just, you know, the idea of like the palimpsest. Like, there's just these faded markings from, you know, the beginning of time, like sort of wrought on the places that we currently exist, and these things have a continuity that is not, you know, it's not to be ignored. It's not insignificant.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right on. So what do you think the pain of the goat is?
Well, because
I just thought it was about goat fucking.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I think well, I think it like it's definitely fucking. I'm wondering if it's like because of the linkages to Pan and satyrs and like goat people and stuff. I'm not sure. I bet it was a sexual act, maybe a rape, or like a satyr fucking a goat or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the 1800s, and we're talking about a guy who I imagine was fairly scandalized by something of that nature. I think it would have definitely
for
hit
sure.
Unspeakable, like Dyson
Satanic
and Phillips,
energies,
like swallowing the puke that's rising in their mouths when they look at it. They're like, good Lord, put it away, man.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yes.
I cannot countenance such a horror. There's so many guys that are rich, like with their monocles falling off in a lot of these and just trembling, literally shaking.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's just very common. And you would think Dyson and Phillips would get over it at some point with all the shit they've fucking seen.
No.
But no.
I think there is, like you said, there is a pretty classist element to this idea, like the veneer of civilization and evil being the kind of chaotic, uneducated, primordial
troglodytes,
pagan. Yeah. Like, there's a little bit of that. There's a reason Lovecraft probably really like, cottoned on to this stuff too. You know what I mean?
Well, and I mean, on the class point, there's a scene where Selby's describing, the what went down with Vivian. And at first, Vivian doesn't even recognize him, and he's kind of grossed out by him. He's like, "You get away from me, you gross poor person," because Vivian's now a fancy rich doctor, and Selby has to explain, like, "No, dude, it's me. It's Selby. Like, we're old friends." Because Selby is still poor and destitute because he's sort of become obsessed with finding this treasure. And I thought that was, again, like another one of these, little nods to the class element of the whole discussion.
And that almost felt like a critique. Like,
yes,
Vivian was my equal, and we made this pact until he didn't earn this. Like, he came into family money, which is what everyone seems to have happened to them.
And the way Machen describes it is it was some uncle died that Vivian forgot even existed.
Right. And then suddenly he was able to pay the licensing fees to become a doctor, and immediately was like, peace. Like,
just bails.
And Selby, to his credit, fucking like 7 years later or something, is like,
he honors the pact.
I made this pact with you, bro. I'm gonna tell you about it. We're in this together. So, in a way, he's written as the far more honorable figure.
Oh yeah, no question. There's no question about it. I mean, I think, and it's obviously important in this connection that Selby is the one who is attacked initially. Like Vivian,
true.
And we don't know the details of Vivian's motives. This is one of those kind of open questions that I think Nat was referring to. Like, did Vivian feel like he had to kill Selby? It couldn't have been for the money because he was already rich. Was it because Vivian was involved in some secretive organization that was invested in this treasure not being found for whatever reason?
Yeah, this has the Lost Club written all over it.
Yes, 100%, 100%. Or some Lipsius.
Yeah, Lipsius. This is Lipsius to the letter, dude. that bastard.
Yes.
I hope Lipsius shows up in something like himself.
That would be sick.
I get the impression that he won't.
No.
He's kind of just the boogeyman, essentially.
Yeah.
It would ruin it if he were like,
he's the boss.
Hello, it is I.
He's the big boss behind the curtain.
Yeah, big bad dude.
Yep.
Yeah, for our gamers out there, it's like sort of like a Ganondorf or something.
Or Big Boss from Metal Gear Solid.
Or Big Boss, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other sort of final thoughts on these or this story or any of these?
No, I just again want to press home the fact of that it's fun.
Very fun.
Machen is a beautiful writer. And I think one of the best aspects of these stories is that evocation of huge spans of time and just like mystery in all of these things. That's something that I think Machen was clearly trying to do very earnestly. Like that was like an earnest, he dresses it up in these stories that he knows will be popular,
but
and then
exposing the pretense of our understanding.
Yeah. And I think he effectively, like, in some ways drives an uncertainty into that. And now us 21st century cynical 30-year-old people are still like, damn, what if there's freaking trolls that live?
Yeah. What if the Lemurians are real?
Yeah, what if Lemuria, what if I could find it under the water?
Which you mentioned before we got on. Shout outs again to Anna Kavan, who was we I don't know if we even brought it up on the podcast or if you brought it up later on Discord.
We didn't. I think why I looked it up is because we were pretty mystified about lemurs. We were like, what the fuck are these lemur aliens doing here?
This is in Ice, by the way, which we did an episode on recently.
And then like them being these sort of enlightened, sort of the version of Atlantis kind of birthplace of humanity type thing within theosophy, which Kavan was also involved in.
Any cool artistic British person back in the day was in that.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. If you like this, give it a like and subscribe. I know I'm supposed to do this when I say like on YouTube. Give it a like, give us a subscribe, and help us.
Hey,
help us.
Give us a like.
Give us a like.
Give us a
like, or else.
Come on.
Help us.
We'll hex you.
Destroy the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah.
With likes and subscribes and comments. Leave a comment if you have thoughts. If you've read Machen, if you have thoughts on Machen.
Yeah, I want some Machen heads in here to really like.
Yeah, where the Machen heads at, y'all?
I know there's academic stuff about this, at least this time period, even, and has to be some stuff on Machen. Let's get this. Get those comment section a little more.
Let's get spicy. It popping off. Yeah. I mean, it's part of why we're doing this. Is I don't think people read this guy. I don't think people read Machen really.
No, and he's been referenced and praised by like Stephen King. Like he's, it's not it's one of the most popular authors on the planet.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So if you're not reading Machen, what are you doing with your life?
Honestly, you're making a mockery of literature.
Okay, I'm done. I got nothing. I can't follow that up.
Hey,
if you really like what we're doing, by the way, patreon.com/spinecrackers, more videos over there. You get to join the Discord, which is fun and funny. A lot of good people over there. Shout outs to the Discord always. And yeah.
And the truth is out there.
The truth is out there, and I want to believe.